difficulty. It is Tuesday, June 21st, 2022. This is our regular board meeting at the school district, Springfield Township. We just concluded an executive session. Sorry for being a couple minutes late, but it was an important topic, reviewing our school safety. Let's go ahead and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A reading of the mission statement. The mission of the school district of Springfield Township is to educate and develop all students as learners and citizens who are high achieving, resilient, and responsible in a changing global community. Let's do a roll call.
Mr. Needleman.
Here.
Mr. DeFranco.
Here.
Dr. Etlin.
Here.
Mrs. Green.
Here.
Mrs. Hubley.
Here.
Mrs. Hughes.
Here.
Mrs. Lipinski. Dr. Taratuski. Mr. Bedard.
Here. Just two quick announcements as we get started. Regarding recording, the board at its discretion may videotape all or any portion of public board meetings subject to the limitations set forth in policy 006 meetings. Board meetings will be broadcast on Friday afternoon following the board meeting. The second announcement is just a congratulations to the teachers and staff and all of the support groups who have helped us successfully navigate through a challenging but very rewarding year. And a special preview, congratulations to the retirees being honored this evening as well. And thank you for all of your service to the children of this community. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Yannicone for her administrative reports.
Thank you, Mr. Bedard. Thank you, Mr. Bedard. I want to say good evening to everyone as well. And we're going to begin the administrative report tonight with our Spartan Spotlight, recognizing our staff members who have retired this year from Springfield Township schools and offices. We have 18 retirees this year, 6 of whom were able to join us either in person or virtually, and we're happy to have them with us. I'm going to ask each supervisor to come to the microphone to speak about their retirees, and then we'll have a gift to present to those who are able to join us tonight. They're on the table over here to my left. So I'm going to start with the high school and Dr. Scragan, who's going to talk a little bit about our high school retirees.
Thank you. Good evening. Not sure if they're with us online tonight. Karen Farrell, if she's online tonight. Same thing with Zelda McFarland, but I just go on the record to congratulate them on their retirements. We do have Peggy Zahner behind me. Peggy joined the district as a long-term sub at the middle school for the 1988-89 school year. From the fall of 1988 through the 1992 school year, Peggy was a part-time teacher, half-day at the high school. In 1995, Peggy joined the social studies department, which is where she worked until her retirement last week. Peggy has been the department coordinator for the last 10 years. In addition to teaching, Peggy has been the advisor for our Youth in Government, or YAG program, as well as the National Honor Society chairperson. Peggy is retiring after 31 years working for our school district. And I'd like to congratulate her for her retirement.
Dr. Scragan, would you find Mrs. Zahner's gift? Each of our retirees this year are receiving a vase with the Springfield Township seal and their name and years of service. So Peggy, come on up. Thank you very much. All right, for the middle school, we have Mr. Fuller.
I don't know if Julie Rasmussen is with us online. I know that she couldn't make it. She was not feeling well. I don't know if she joined us online or not.
We do not see her online.
Okay. So then the only retiree we have from the middle school is Mrs. Peggy Vossler, who is here tonight with her husband, Bill. And she's worked in the school district of Springfield Township for 25 years since she came on board in the summer of 1997. During that time, Peggy has touched the lives of countless children, and she is among the people who receive the highest accolades from our community as a teacher who introduces crucial organizational and scholarship skills to students as they enter secondary school. Mrs. Vossler has been an advocate for Veterans Affairs and the recognition of our armed forces at STMS, and she has given countless hours of her time to our Veterans Day and Memorial Day assemblies, as well as to special projects that recognize the families of first responders and military personnel. Thank you, Peggy, for 25 years of service and dedication to the district, and for your honesty, kindness, and understanding. We will miss you.
Thank you very much. And at this time, we have Dr. McLaurin for our Erdenheim retirees.
Good evening, everyone. I believe we have Margie Burke, who's retiring. She's not able to be with us here this evening, but I did want to share a thank you to Ms. Burke for her 8 years of wonderful service at Erdenheim Elementary School. During her time, she served as an instructional aide, where she supported our reading specialists. And not only did she support our students with reading, she also, out of the kindness of her heart and the skill set that she had, she also supported our students who were non-English speaking, and she worked beyond to try to provide them with some support. So just want to take this opportunity to recognize her 8 years. We really appreciate all she gave to our school community. I know she's not able to be here with us, but we just want to give her a special shout out and let her know that we appreciate her support of our school community.
Thank you, Dr. McLaurin and Dr. Markle. Our Enfield retirees. She needs a book.
Good evening. I do believe we have one person that is on Zoom. So, but I will start. We have 3 instructional aides that are retiring this year. I want to thank Pat Bailey, Karen Ostrom, and Joanne DiGirolamo. Pat served 16 years in our school district. Karen served over 11 years in our district as an instructional aide and also a teacher before that. And then Joanne served 1 year with our team. And we really appreciate all that they did to support our students and teachers and to really help our students be successful in the classroom. So we really do appreciate them. I'd like to honor and talk about Lori Costanza, who I believe is with us virtually. Not yet. Okay, well, Lori Costanza was one of our speech and language pathologists, and she actually worked in all of our buildings. She's worked at the high school, the middle school. I had the good fortune of working with her at Erdenheim and Enfield as well. And she just brings such a wealth of knowledge. One thing that always stood out for me, anytime I was in IEP meetings with her, you know, it's a lot of educational jargon that can be confusing at times. And she just found such a nice way to explain it in a way that made sense. And I really think she was doing that mostly for me, but I know the parents appreciated it as well. And so Lori's going to be sorely missed. You know, she has such a great sense of humor. Anytime she came into a classroom, she brought a lot of light and energy with her. And we're going to really, really miss her presence here. And we wish her all the best of luck in her next endeavor, because she says she's not done working yet. So we don't know what that is, but we appreciate all of her service to Springfield Township. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Markle. And from Zoom, we have Mr. Bray, Nate Bray, our transportation director, who's going to speak about our retiring members of the transportation department. Mr. Bray.
Good evening. So it looks like we too did not have anybody here that could make it either in person or virtually. I guess the nature of transportation folks is we move around a lot. So I do just want to take a moment and recognize a few people that have been here and have retired. So Tom Gallagher, who's been one of our school bus drivers for the last 11 years. Rob Hasday, who's been a school bus driver for 11 years. Blaine McCleary, who's been with the district as driver for 13 years. Greg McGrath, who has been here for the past 6 years. John Ward, who has served as both a school bus driver and a school bus aide for 15 years. And finally, and most recently, one of our mechanics from the transportation department that's helped take really good care of our fleet for the last 35 years is going to be leaving us in just the next couple of weeks. He's on vacation now, and I think is returning for one day to say goodbye, but we'll definitely miss all of them. And just want to recognize their retirement. Good luck, everybody, and enjoy.
Okay, and last but not least, I get the chance to say a few words about Michelle Kennedy, our one administrative assistant who's already crying, who actually has been retired since January 3rd. So she's happy and tan and rested right now because she's been retired for a few months. But I asked to be able to speak on Michelle's behalf because when I arrived at the district, Michelle was the administrative assistant for the assistant superintendent. And so she was the very first person I met. And she immediately made me feel welcomed and cared for and supported. It's a difficult time to change jobs at 50 years old, but Michelle made it much easier for me. Michelle came to the district in 2000, 21 and a half, now almost 22 years ago. And at the time she was a cafeteria aide and then a library aide at the high school before coming to central office, where she had the distinct pain of being the administrative assistant to 5 assistant superintendents, and we're a surly bunch. And so I'm very grateful to Michelle and thrilled to have her back tonight. I really appreciate that you took the time long after your retirement date to come back tonight and be recognized. And I do have a vase for you that I'll go up and get. Michelle and I can see. All right, now I want to encourage the retirees. You are welcome to stay for what is anticipated to be a long meeting, or you can easily exit and start your retirement or restart your retirement at this time. Thank you very much. We appreciate all of your hard work. Come back and visit us. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to shift to the administrative report, which is very short. We've arrived at the end of the school year, and I want to wish our 10-month staff and our students and families a wonderful summer break. Our 12-month staff and administrative team is going to be working in our schools and offices Mondays through Thursdays throughout the summer months, and we are available as needed to answer any questions. Next week, I'll be sending a newsletter to all district families and staff that will include important information on activities over the summer and how to be ready for the 2022-2023 school year. As you know, over the past few days, many families in our community celebrated Juneteenth, the federal holiday commemorating the emancipation of enslaved African Americans in Texas in 1865. In Springfield schools, we include instruction about Juneteenth and the relevance of our nation taking that first step away from the disgrace of enslaving fellow people on U.S. soil. While much is yet to be accomplished in creating a more perfect union, we recognize and celebrate this now federal holiday in our community and commit to continuing our work together in upholding the values and expectations of our equity vision statement to bring opportunity and achievement to all students in our schools and community. And finally, I'm going to reintroduce Mr. Nate Bray, who is going to be presenting an update to the board on a recent request of the Property Committee regarding the requirements and opportunities for alternative fuel sources of busing in the future. So I'm actually transitioning from the administrative report to Mr. Bray's report. All right.
That will work well. Thank you for the updates. And I was assuming Mr. Bray was just going to be presenting on his hiring needs, given all the retirees from the group. But just another thank you to all of our retirees for their service. And Mr. Bray, we'll go over to you for the transportation report.
Okay, so as I understand it, I don't think the electric bus could be with us in person tonight. So I think that we were just going to acknowledge its existence and get back to the business of the meeting, which actually should include, yes, my annual advertisement that we are hiring drivers for the members of the public who are watching, and it's a great and an enjoyable job. But with all of that said, thanks and good evening again. During the May meeting of the Finance Committee, some of our committee members expressed their interest in learning a little bit more about electric buses during a discussion regarding some upcoming vehicle replacements. So tonight we've prepared a short presentation that will address some of these questions or answers to some of these questions, as well as discuss funding opportunities and challenges in moving towards a greener fleet. If I could get to the next slide, please. We thought that a good place to start is just with a high-level overview of what our existing fleet looks like. So the school district of Springfield Township currently owns 60 yellow school buses. They're made up of 22 Type D diesel-powered vehicles, which really just means big school bus. Those are rated between 72 and 84 passenger. We have 6 Type C school buses that are a little bit smaller. Those are rated at 48 passengers. And both those Type Ds and Type Cs, we try to have a useful life in there of about 10 to 15 years. We also have 32 Type A vehicles, primarily unleaded gasoline powered. Again, we look to use those for roughly 10 to 12 years. And across all of those vehicles, as we look at routes that we put them on any given day, we average out for vehicles that are on routes, not including spares, obviously, that they would use about 7 to 8 gallons of their respective fuels per day. What that really means in our fuel usage for the school district of Springfield Township is we wind up using about 35,000 gallons of unleaded gasoline and an additional roughly 35,000 gallons of diesel fuel over the course of any given school year. Typically, we try to lock in fuel rates prior to the beginning of a school year, as we're part of the Montgomery County Intermediate Units Fuel Consortium. Obviously, before we would lock in any rates prior to a school year, fuel rates are going to vary a fair deal based on what the market dictates in any year prior to those lock-ins. So with any alternative fuels, obviously any discussion of alternative fuels, there are going to be some benefits and some drawbacks to each thing that we look at there. It does have lower long-term fuel costs to go with something like an electric vehicle or potentially something like a natural gas or a propane vehicle. However, we, on the drawback side there, see some challenges as far as fueling stations and lack of standardization between fueling stations. Additionally, some of these greener vehicles enjoy lower maintenance costs, though it is also important to point out that a return on investment for a lower maintenance cost for an electric based school bus it would take a much longer time just based on the initial purchase price, to be making up the difference between that purchase price and some of those lower realized costs. Additionally, with the school district of Springfield Township being a little bit of a smaller school district, we don't see some of the same level of fuel bills or annual maintenance bills that are sort of driven by putting a lot of miles on the vehicles. Our routes don't do quite the same number of miles as, say, some larger districts. An obvious benefit to any greener solution is definitely eco-friendliness. And currently there are benefits as far as some funding opportunities, both through the federal and state governments that we can address very briefly. Excuse me. Finally, sorry, it changed a little bit sooner than I thought. Yes, I just wanted to make sure when we address drawbacks, additional ones are kind of the variety of vehicles that we can see there. Right now, the market leaders are most definitely electric, compressed natural gas, or propane-driven vehicles, though the current hubbub, if you will, is primarily on the electric side of the market. In fact, as we talk about some of the funding, we'll show you that at the present time, electric is far, far greater funded than natural gas or propane. Next slide, please. So as we talk a little bit more about funding, the current existing funding sources, aside from our own general fund or capital reserve, is that the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection is getting ready to open applications for the next round of funding in the Driving PA Forward initiative. A problem with this initiative through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is that it's providing significantly less money per vehicle purchased and would require applicants to initially pay an entire cost of a cleaner energy vehicle, as well as any applicable infrastructure costs, before being able to submit pre-approved project costs for reimbursement. At the present time, the better funding opportunity, for a number of reasons, is the EPA's Clean School Bus Program, which does offer more money per vehicle and actually pays grant monies upfront to reduce the immediate financial burden on the applicant. Next slide, please. So what is the Clean School Bus Program through the EPA? It's being funded by the bipartisan, infrastructure law. And over the course of the next 5 years is going to be distributing $5 billion to existing school buses with zero emissions, or being replaced, with zero emissions or low emission models. In 2022, they plan to award $500 million total, though $250 million of that is reserved exclusively for zero emissions electric school buses. The other $250 million is eligible for the reduced emissions programs, such as propane or compressed natural gas. But as you'll see in this moment, again, those are significantly reduced awards. The application deadline for this current funding round closes on August 19th. And all public school districts are eligible to apply, but it's important to know that grant awards are actually going first to prioritized districts, which are districts considered high need, rural, funded by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or receive Title 20 support for children who reside on Indian land. Once they get through prioritized applicants, then they are looking to award on a lottery-based system to lesser prioritized districts, like what Springfield Township would be. So for lesser prioritized districts, a maximum rebate per electric vehicle, as we talk about, and we're going to primarily focus on electric for a couple of reasons. But one big piece there is that to even consider the small pilot options that the Finance Committee asked us to answer some questions about, we can't really do a small pilot on something like a CNG bus or a propane bus, simply because we have greater infrastructure hurdles even at a small pilot level. So the maximum rebate on those electric vehicles is $250,000 per electric vehicle, and an additional $13,000 per vehicle if you need that for some of the infrastructure costs. And once again, those CNG buses or propane buses are capped at $30,000 and $20,000 respectively. So it's a pretty significant difference in what they're looking to award. And the EPA plans to announce the award recipients in October of 2022. At this time, we are planning that we are perfectly capable and eligible to apply, so we can prepare an application prior to that August 19th deadline that we would hear back from the EPA in October of 2022. There is not a penalty if we would apply and actually be granted funding. However, at that time, for any reason, choose not to pursue a project. Next slide, please. So additionally, the Clean School Bus Program is designed to be a one-to-one vehicle replacement program, meaning to be eligible for any type of funding, applicants have to already own eligible vehicles that will be removed from service. So eligible vehicles are model year 2010 or older diesel-powered vehicles that the plan is to scrap. If the fleet would not have any of those vehicles specifically and is requesting zero-emission school bus replacements, a 2010 or older non-diesel bus can be scrapped as long as it's an internal combustion engine. Or you're able to scrap, sell, or donate. So a 2011 or newer, you don't necessarily have to scrap that. You could attempt to recoup a little money on with a sale. But you may go ahead and offer a vehicle of that model year as well, or newer. They must all have a gross vehicle weight rating of greater than 10,000 pounds. They must be operational at the time of the application submission. And a tricky part for any application process that we look to go through in Springfield Township is they must have provided bus service to the public district for at least 3 days a week on average during this past school year. And the reason I say that that becomes a little bit tricky is because in May, when we talked about what we were looking at as far as our current need on vehicle replacement, The two large school buses most in need of replacement are eligible based on model year, which would be 2005 and 2006. However, as we have moved them to spare vehicles, as you know, as we purchase any new vehicles, we're going to take some of our older stuff and move it into a spare status. That 2005 and 2006 do not currently meet the minimum requirement of use for averaging out at 3 days a week. They're used more on our heavy days or when we have more mechanical problems. But as a testament to our 35-year mechanic, things have been kept on the road pretty well. So fortunately, we haven't had to go quite as far into our spare fleet as often as we potentially would. Having said all of that, we do own two school buses that would be eligible under this program for funding. That's one 2008 and one is a 2010. Each of those vehicles is still on a daily route and is anticipated to continue to be on a daily route into the 22-23 school year. Next slide, please. Some requirements for what you can purchase if you are awarded funds with the Clean School Bus program through the EPA are any unit that has a battery electric CNG, which again is compressed natural gas, or a propane drivetrain. Once again, the award is much higher for battery electric, and there is more money set aside exclusively for battery electric. It must be an EPA certified vehicle model year 2021 or newer. It must again be greater than 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating. It cannot be ordered prior to receiving any official notification of selection of EPA funding. If a purchase order exists prior to that award, it would no longer be considered an eligible vehicle under the program. It must be actually purchased. It cannot be leased. It cannot be leased to own. And once purchased, it must serve the district listed on the application for a minimum of 5 years from the delivery date. All federal safety standards have to be met, and it needs to be maintained, operated, insured, registered, charged, and or fueled according to the manufacturer's recommendations and state requirements. It cannot include a diesel component for a passenger heater. It cannot be combined with other federal funds for financing the project. And upon request, it has to be made available for inspection by the EPA or a representative for at least 5 years from the delivery date. And I'm going to turn it for just a moment to Ms. Green on the next slide, who's going to start to talk a little bit about some of the funding.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Bray. So again, just as a recap, in both Finance and Property Committee discussions held earlier this year, we talked about, or the committees asked us to explore the possibility of piloting 2 electric school buses. So just talking about the electric buses, the current cost per bus is $415,000, which is about 3 times the cost of our price to purchase a new diesel or gas bus. The current battery life is approximately 8 to 10 years and is about 40% cost of the bus. Those 2 highlights, obviously, on the amount of it being 3 times. And as Mr. Bray presented earlier, that the average useful life of our current buses are about 12 years. So the battery life is approximately 8 to 10 years right now with the technology we have for electric buses. Obviously, as time goes on, that could be better. But also keep in mind that you still have the actual bus to consider, that it's still a vehicle. So the battery life is not the only thing that you have to worry about when you're talking about replacing the fleet with electric buses with the 8 to 10 year battery life, and still going to have about approximately a 12-year useful life on the actual vehicle. And then the existing electric and at our current bus depot could support a level 2 charger, which I am going to kick back to Mr. Bray because I will not do it justice as Mr. Bray would to explain what that means.
So again, as we look at this from the basis of the potential for a small pilot or considering a small pilot, basically a level 2 charger is not the slowest, but the slower version. When you hear about electric vehicles and DC fast charging, that would not be what our current infrastructure at the transportation facility can support. We know that our current facility can support We believe one at a time. We think that 2 chargers charging simultaneously would overload the electric system. We're very close to maxed out. However, figuring that the range on these electric vehicles for a large school bus is currently between 100 and 125 miles per charge, depending on how the driver uses it, and the size of our district, we would be able to use one level 2 charger, which would charge 1 vehicle over the course of 1 night. Those would take to go from empty to a full charge, that should take roughly 8 hours or so. And then we would have to plan carefully so that we can charge one night, one the next night. We would not want to get into having both of them depleted to the point that we had to take one off the road because our existing electric infrastructure can't support either DC fast charging or additional chargers running simultaneously. It is also a concern that we potentially would not necessarily be able to charge the vehicle during the day because, again, while we are operational as far as our mechanics maintaining vehicles goes, obviously that's a time when our garages are going to be drawing more electric for them just to support their needs. So a level 2 charger is doable. We absolutely know that, but we do not believe that both buses could charge at once. Ms. Green?
So the next is our return on investment timing. We talked about this in our finance committee meeting, and because of the the size of our district and the size of the pilot that we would be doing, some of the things that could escalate the return on investment or make it go faster, it would kind of slow us down because of the size of the pilot. Again, we're not even talking about the grid because we don't have the infrastructure to support that at this time. And again, it's a level 2 charger where we wouldn't even be charging both buses at one time. And then the availability of the buses are running about 6 months to 1 year. So putting the pilot in place would at minimum be the 23-24 school year through the grant opportunities, the purchasing of the buses, and the turnaround of when we can actually get the buses. So just to recap on the funding piece, the EPA grant application is due August 19th. The maximum award we could get per vehicle is $250,000. So we would be on the hook for the difference between the 250 and the 415. The maximum award amount for infrastructure is $13,000. Again, as Mr. Bray said, we could get away with the support of a level 2 charger at this time. The one thing is funds must be awarded prior to buses being ordered. So we would not be able to pre-order and jump the gun before we got notified that we were awarded grant opportunities if we go through the application process through EPA. And then EPA will announce the awards in October of 2022. Next slide, please.
Can I just speak in
Sure.
with a question? Sorry, just because it's come up a couple times. The $13,000 for infrastructure, I imagine part of that is for the charging station. Is there anything else that goes with that, or is it just the charging station? And if so, it's $13,000. I just don't know anything about charging stations. Is
I
that
honestly, the research into the charging stations, that's something that we would not be able to support at our current bus depot. That's not infrastructure we would be able to put in place. As Mr. Bray said, we'd have to go at the level 2 because that's what we could support without having to do major infrastructure upgrades. The other thing you have to keep in mind, and we're going to get into this about our current depot, is the flooding aspect of it. So we really don't want to start putting infrastructure in for electric buses when we are, as Mr. Sultanic is shaking his head on that. So at this point, just identifying that there are funds available for infrastructure upgrades, but at this time, we would just be applying for the school buses.
Okay,
Okay,
fair enough. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so some immediate factors when considering the bus pilot is basically our depot. We've been in discussion about this year very heavily at property committee meetings. As you all know, our current bus depot site, which is across from our new Enfield K2 building, it does not fully house our current gas diesel fleet. As you know, if you go to the middle schools, some of our fleet is parked in the back parking lot of our middle school because the site cannot house our entire bus fleet. It also will not support, as it stands right now, the infrastructure for an electric bus fleet. So we would not be able to move to a transition bus fleet at our current site. So in talking about this, we've had talks about some challenges we have at our current bus depot. And regardless of fleet design, the need for a new bus depot in order to house our entire fleet, and also for security, safety, and just for upgrades to ensure that we're maximizing our bus depot. So the recommended new site would be about 7 to 10 acres to fully house our current fleet, our garage and staff parking. We would recommend infrastructure that would be flexible for both diesel and have the flexibility to transition to an alternative fuel vehicle fleet. And that estimated cost that we had talked about in previous meetings is about $10 million, which would include having to find a site that would be able to house the 7 to 10 acres within our township. Next slide, please. Some other immediate factors when considering this is our current bus fleet. As Mr. Bray presented earlier, the 2 bus purchases that were presented at the May 22 Finance Committee that were deferred, they are not eligible to be replaced by the electric buses. So in order to maintain our current transportation plan for the 23-24 school year, we will need to move forward in replacing those because again, they're spares, and we need to make sure that our current fleet is where it needs to be in order to safely transport students. We've talked about before, the bulk of our fleet purchases were purchased sometime between 2015 and 18. So this kind of gives you a breakdown of that. If we sit with our average useful life of about 12 years, and again, there's a plus or minus on those. And some of the purchases that we've brought forward, it's been a little bit less than that. Some have been a little bit more. So we go with the average of 12 years. So you'll see that in 2027, we have 10 type A vehicles that will be up for replacement if it sits with that 12-year average life. In 2028, which is the big heavy hitter, we have 11 type Ds and 10 type As that will need to be reviewed for replacement. In 2029, we have 9 type A vehicles, and in 2030, 4 type D vehicles. So again, another immediate factor is funding, not only maintaining our current fleet, but also being able to supplement at the same time or absorbing the full cost of electric buses, depending on the grants that we might be eligible for. And also right now, EPA is currently funded through 2026. We do not know the future of that funding. So that money, that $250 million that was up for this year, that $5 billion, I think it was total, that ends 2026. It has to be refunded in order for this program and for these numbers to continue. So if you see where the bulk of our purchases are in the transition with that, the future funding is unknown. So we don't know if we will get any supplement for transitioning those buses. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about long-term cost considerations for the electric bus fleet. And this is a super awesome spreadsheet that you're going to see with lots of numbers. So get ready. Next slide. There you go. So hopefully you can see this. So what we've attempted to do here is to try to timeline where our current replacements are and put costs to those. And then also identify, replacement costs for putting an electric fleet into place. So if you look at the 1, 2, 3, 4th column, that is our gas and diesel cost. And then the 5th column is our electric costs. And then the very far right the title is being masked by my face right now, is facilities costs. So there's just one line on there. So what we did was we've taken present to 23-24 school year. So we've spoken about the 2 type D diesel buses that will need to be replaced in order for us to maintain our fleet. You'll see in the green that the type D electric, those are the buses that if we move forward with a pilot. So total cost would be $830,000. Obviously, if we were awarded any grant funds, that some of that cost would be offset by grant funding and supplemented through local funding. So, but the total cost of that would be $830,000. And then you'll see over the next 3 years that just in the normal course of the bus replacement with our current fleet, we will need to replace 2 type D and 2 type A diesel buses. We put a little bit of a markup because right now we are seeing prices get marked up months. It's a month span between like a 3% markup. So we put a 5% markup on current pricing for those two. You'll see that at that time, there is no electric replacement recommendations at that time, because again, with our current site, we can only maintain two. Then we get into 27, 28, and there's an asterisk by that. The reason is this is when we begin our serious bus replacement. And this is when, at this point, if we move forward to transitioning to electric buses, we would need to have a new bus depot completed by the end of 27, 28 in order to have the infrastructure in place to start housing more than two buses. So you'll see in the fourth column that if we replace 10 buses of type A, it would be a little less than $950,000. Type A, if we transition to electric, it would be $2.8 million. About 60% of that right now under EPA is funded. I don't know because again, EPA is only funded through 2026, so we don't know the future of the funding. And then it just moves down from there. You'll see the replacement 28, 29 is really the heavy hit where it's 21 buses. So you can see the cost comparison between our diesel and gas buses versus our electric buses. And then 29, 30, we have 9 that would need to be replaced, and then it tapers off at 4. So this kind of gives you a good snapshot of the funding and the commitment that would be needed to transition us into electric costs. Again, these are costs based on what we know today. We have to go with our best case scenario. We don't know what technology is going to be in place, what future funding is going to be in place. We're going off of the information we have right now. Next slide, please. So just some summary considerations and next steps. So again, transitioning our bus fleet to electric or any other alternative fuel vehicles, it will require our transportation depot project to move ahead of all of our other capital projects. We will need to have that infrastructure in that new building in place prior to us transitioning into any alternative fuel vehicles. In saying that, some of our other capital projects that we need to look at is our middle school requires attention. We have a capital and preventative maintenance projects that are identified in our 5-year capital plan. Those will need to be deferred. Our current bus fleet replacement, we need to continue that to ensure continuity and of transportation services at our current level. Our artificial turf fields at the high school need to be replaced in approximately 8 years. So those are other capital projects that we need to think about on top of if we have to move or look at putting a bus depot in place on top of transitioning those buses into electric buses at the same time. So at this point, we are looking to submit the grant application to EPA in August. From there, we will provide an update at the fall property committee meeting that will be to be determined. Obviously, it will need to be after October so that we know if we got the grant funding. And then at that time, we can evaluate purchase potential of electric buses, depending on those funding opportunities. And then we need to address the immediate and long-term considerations that were presented in this presentation. So at this point, if there are any questions for myself, Dr. Yannicone, Mr. Thorne, or Mr. Bray, we can take those.
Before any questions, I just want to say thank you to Mr. Bray and to Mr. Thorne and to Ms. Green for all their research on this. Our goal in this presentation was not to provide any recommendations. We know that this is an interest of the members of the Finance and the Property Committee. It's a major investment of time and facilities and finances ultimately, if the board decides that you'd like us to proceed, and it's not a quick decision. So we wanted to give you this information now. We will email you the slide presentation so that you can have all of that information. And then between now and the fall, we'll know whether or not we receive the grant. And that could help us to make a decision on a pilot. And at the same time, we do have to make a decision about the bus depot sooner rather than later this fall, whether or not we're going to continue to invest in upgrading the facility as it currently exists and remaining with the current fleet and the current model, or whether we're going to move to higher ground, quite frankly. And so those are all things that we look forward to discussing with you in committee in the fall. So I just want to be clear, there's no recommendations from us. We just wanted to bring the information as requested.
Can I, I'm sorry to monopolize. Can I just ask one thing? The replacement, he said with kind of an inflection, because I'm not sure that's quite the right term, of the bus depot has to be done anyway, right? Regardless whether we move to an electric fleet or not, something has to be done with the bus depot, whether it's replacement, whether it's fixing, whether it's whatever it is. So that's consideration has to be done for that no matter what, right?
Yes, Mr. Thorne, why don't you come up and just speak briefly about that? At a earlier spring property committee meeting, Mr. Thorne had presented some factors for us in whether or not we would try to upgrade the current facility or look for a new site. Why don't you
Thank you,
just summarize
Dr.
that?
Yannicka. Yes, good evening, everybody. Yeah, so everybody's aware of the site, how it floods. It's the biggest thing. Our engineering firm did a study, a structural study, and pointed out different things that need to be addressed right away. The roof obviously is being addressed this summer. It's really in bad shape. Regardless of what we do, stay there or move on, we need to replace the roof, do these structural repairs. That was obvious. But looking long-term, again, what type of fleet we have, I think it's really advantageous to the district to move to higher ground, as Dr. Yannicka had said. So does that answer your question, or?
Yeah, no, thank you. I just wanted to try to establish a baseline.
I think it's quite
of what we're doing.
If I could add, and while you're still in the microphone seat, the big insight here was because of the complexity of the changeover of the fleet and that huge number of vehicles that need to be replaced in 2027, 2028. It drives the urgency of how quickly we would need to deliver this project to have the option. If we don't deliver the project by that date, we would not have the option to go to electric, even if we all really, really wanted to, because the infrastructure wouldn't be able to support it. Is that correct? Okay. So it's a very clear discussion point for us moving forward to reprioritize capital projects.
Just adding to that, if we prioritize that, something else is taking a back seat.
Yep.
Okay, which is currently not in the back seat. We have a timeline set for these other projects.
That is correct.
So
Yes,
I'm
sorry.
not sure. Sometimes I make assumptions and thought it was clear.
And will we review that list in the property committee meeting in August?
We can most certainly do that.
Yes.
Sarah.
I had a couple of questions. First, thank you for a very thorough presentation. I think one question I had, and I'm sorry if this was in there, I didn't see it in the spreadsheet or elsewhere, but I understand that the cost is 3 times the amount for an electric, but how much do we save in fuel as a result of electric? I wasn't sure if we saw that number.
We identified in the beginning of the presentation what our current the type of
I saw it,
buses
yeah.
and how much fuel they use in any given day. So I think with the bus pilot, since it's 2, and I think it's type, Nate might have to correct me, type D buses, based on, it's about 7 gallons a day of what we're using in fuel. So because the pilot is smaller at this point,
Yeah.
the savings isn't as substantial as if obviously the entire fleet is being replaced or a larger number of buses are being replaced. So the initial pilot savings wouldn't be as significant as
Gotcha.
doing something on a larger scale.
Is it possible at some later date to get a number though of like at today's gas prices, if we went ahead and bought an electric bus based on that number of what you know of usage? Because what I'm trying to say is it may be 3 times to buy it, but the amount of fuel saved within a year might equal 2/3 of that, in which case
We
there's
can
no
most
net loss,
definitely do
right?
that for.
So I'm curious, that's a question, not a statement, because I don't know if that's true. I know sometimes with electric, it really is cost prohibitive and that's not the case. Another question I had is the spreadsheet you had, I saw the facilities costs, but was the infrastructure costs for moving to electric was not incorporated in that, is that correct?
So we had a range, I worked with Mr. Thorne, who's worked with our engineers that did the evaluation of the bus depot. About 10 million is an average of what we think between land acquisition and upgrades that we would need. And looking at doing an upgrade again, we would factor in any type of alternative fuel stations or infrastructure that we would need. And at that point, that is when that we could apply for some infrastructure grants to talk about charging stations and those things. So that we didn't net everything together and we used that 10 million. We think within the 10 million, we would be able to provide a depot that would provide an alternative fuel option.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. And sorry, I have two more questions and then I'll stop. One is, I'm just curious, so you focused on the EPA, but I was curious if there'd been any research of any private sector grants, because I know there are a couple of companies that are investing in school districts, and I don't know the details of them, but I was just curious if we looked beyond government funding as an option for this. And then beyond grants, also, there's diesel rebates, right, for usage. And so I just wasn't sure if there's things, also the State Department of Environmental Protection versus the federal, just was curious if there had been research done there yet.
So we did do research on the state piece, but no to the private sector piece. So we just looked at what funding opportunities through grants, through obviously governmental agencies that were available out there, because that is what's kind of front and center when you're talking about electric buses and the amount of money that went into EPA that was funded over the next 5 years. So we can most definitely add that to our list.
I mean, I don't want extra work, but I want to make sure we're really thinking out possibilities. And then my last question, and thank you all so much for this, is, and maybe I think this is a question for Mr. Bray, but I'm curious if there's a sense from your field, Mr. Bray, of like, how much time do people in the field think the like fuel-based vehicles have left?
So I don't think anybody's quite assigned a number to that yet. I can, and this is just a comment from me, about 2 years ago, as we were looking at some fleet replacement goals and looking at fleet replacement schedule, we did have an organization within the township contact us and just say, hey, are you looking at the potential to transition to electric at all? And as we really sat down and thought about it, and again, this comes mainly from my brain, so please forgive, it's not a major conversation that the district has had yet. But when thinking about the complexity of that type of changeover, as well as the current cost, as well as some of the battery technologies, a thought that went through my head was that the replacement cycle that we just looked at, that gets really heavy between 2027 and 2030, felt like an extreme rush to be able to transition a significant portion of the fleet to definitely electric, but even other types of green fuels, again, with some of our infrastructure challenges. The conversation that I had with that local organization is that potentially a more fruitful thought process was not to look at the current, that 15-year replacement cycle, but to look at it as a 30-year replacement cycle, and potentially look towards saying that we would know that we weren't able to move as fast as we would love to, but that if we planned from the beginning, something like now we wouldn't be 30 years out anymore, but something like a 20 to 25 year cycle would be much more comfortable, would allow a lot more planning, and would put us in a better place if and when we see those technologies change, see any of the pricing come down, or see what other technologies are on the horizon in 15 to 20 years.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because I just want to say to fellow committee members, like, I obviously am very excited about this, but I want to make sure it's the right moment technology wise, also that we're doing it for folks who are old enough to remember when like Betamax came out and that was going to be like the premier way to watch home movies, right? And then you spent a ton of money on that. And then 2 years later, VHS came out and it was like, why did I waste my time on that? And so I just want to make sure we're also hitting the right moment. And I think, Mr. Bray, we're just going to have to rely on you of knowing what the trends are right now in the field, of when it's time to make that investment, and when do we get ahead of it in time before it's too late and then we're not set up to support it because fuel-based cars are out, or vehicles are outdated.
I just want to reiterate to that point, something that Mr. Bray and Ms. Green said, and Mr. Thorne, we believe that we're going to need a new bus depot, and that should be a priority for us in capital projects in the near future. We can build a bus depot that can be flexible so that if decisions are made down the road, if technologies improve, if funding increases, if other opportunities arise, we would be ready. We just know that given the current infrastructure, it would be very tight for us to do a 2-bus pilot on the current site. So we want to continue this conversation, obviously, and we're happy to bring more information forward. We can look into some of the other suggestions prior to the fall property committee meeting. I want to clarify, I don't think we're going to end up with a property meeting in August. It will probably be September. But we won't hear about this grant application until October. So probably a little later in the fall, we can have a conversation. And we're happy to continue to take feedback from the board. I'll send out the slides so that you can really peruse them and then see what other questions might arise. Okay.
Other comments or questions? Ms. Green, Mr. Bray, excellent job. We asked, would it be possible to design a pilot? And you came back with a 30-year transformation plan. So I appreciate all the work that went into that, and we'll look forward to updates in the fall. And if you need any support on the applications, please lean on the board. All right. I'm looking for who goes next, and it's me. Okay. We're actually going to open it up for public comments on agenda items. Did I miss something on the agenda? Oh, we have an update from Dr. Etlin on academic affairs.
The Academic Affairs Committee met yesterday, June 20th, and in attendance were Dr. McYannicone, Dr. Van Voren, Mr. DeFranco, Dr. Johnston, Ms. Hubley, Mr. McCaslin, Dr. Zagrin, Mr. Gottesman, Ms. Fessorelli. If I've messed up names, please forgive me, Dr. Rittenhouse, and Mr. Oliver. Our meeting yesterday was very robust and it was very, very detailed. First, there was high school proposed curriculums that were presented. And in the development of these proposed curriculum, the profile of a graduate was kept in mind to build a lifelong learner. The focus areas that were considered in the development of these curriculums included critical thinking and communication, problem solving and decision-making, being a self-motivated learner, global citizenship, and the robust electives were a thread to better decision-making. First, in social studies, the suggested curriculums were for street law for grades 11 and 12, ethnic studies in grades 11 to 12. Moving on, it's also included in social studies was economics for grades 11 and 12, history and films for grades 11 and 12, and civics for grade 12. Moving on, also was discussed in the area of physical education was the proposal of a sports management and medicine program, and this would be for grades 10 through 12. Additionally, math curriculum was also discussed, and there were 3 topics in the area of math. First, business math for grades 11 and 12, concepts of geometry for grade 11, and this will be a course that will be focused for the special education students. Additionally, there was a textbook adoption had been recommended, and that was for the area of academic statistics. In the area of music, piano and keyboarding was recommended, as well as digital music production. And for the digital music production curriculum, this was going to be a program with students would have dual enrollment with the Montgomery County Community College for college credit. Moving on to library. Discussed was the library resource selection criteria, which is a procedure that aligns to our policy number 109. This criteria details how books are reviewed, selected, and updated. We also had a very, very detailed special education plan that was presented by Dr. Van Voren. our Director of Special Education. And this plan was for the years 2023 through 2025, with a start date addressing the plan this coming fall. This plan focuses on areas for improvement and planning, which include statewide assessment, identification method, disproportionate representation in special education by race, ethnicity, and disability, non-resident incarcerated students oversight for Carson Valley School, the least restrictive environment, meaningful participation of students with disabilities in extracurricular activities, a continuum of placement options and providing opportunity for these students, out-of-district placement, positive behavior supports and behavioral health services, special education facilities within each building, and lastly, special education personnel development and training. Our summer programs were also discussed. Our ESY, teachers began training for ESY yesterday. The program will include itinerant reading and math support for grades K-8. Also, there's itinerant tutoring for grades 6 through 12, and those dates for support will be from June 27th to August 25th. The Spartan Academy was also discussed. And to date, there are 241 registered students. Session A will be from July 11th through July 21st, with Session B to follow August 1st to August 11th. And this would be for grades 1 through 9 for rising students. Summer projects. The administrative team has their work cut out for them this summer with the following projects. Looking again at the state assessments, looking at AP and STAR assessment review, data analysis and planning for the building level as well as district, and the curriculum website revision. And for the fall, the administrative team is going to be looking at an assessment presentation as well as student advisor to academic affairs. I'd like to take this opportunity to extend a thank you for everyone that was involved in the research, the planning, and the development of the curriculum that was presented yesterday, as well as the plan and the projects that were also discussed. And it's very apparent that through all these proposals and plans that the district has really kept our students first and all of their endeavors in moving their curriculums and everything that supports our students academically. And most importantly, not only keeping our students first, it was also evident there was a lot of research that was put into the development and planning of these curriculum, which has definitely made, again, our students first and helping them to move and to be lifelong learners for the future. So thank you for everyone who partaked in all of those activities. And that concludes my report.
Dr. Etlin, I love your updates. I want to applaud after you're done. These grand statements to close things out. Awesome update. And it sounds like really good attendance for
Yes.
Spartan Academy for the summer. That's awesome. Okay, any comments or questions for Dr. Etlin? Great. We will move on to public comments on agenda items. I don't see anyone in the room with their hand up or signups, but we can go online. Mr. Needleman.
Yeah, as Mr. Bedard said, I don't see anyone in attendance who signed up for agenda items. I don't see anyone with a hand raised online. If I'm mistaken though, and somebody does want to speak on an agenda item, please raise your hand. I don't see any hands raised.
Very good. Then I will
All right.
spare everyone a reminder of the rules of engagement for public comment. We'll jump right into the business of the meeting this evening. We have some administrative updates here on approval of minutes. Our first action is the approval of minutes from our May 3rd, 2022 interim hybrid board meeting. The Board of School Directors approves the board minutes from May 3rd, 2022. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second.
Second.
Any comments or questions on our? Very good. Ms. Green.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley, Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Another approval of minutes from our May 16th, 2022 regular hybrid board meeting. Recommended action, the Board of School Directors approves the board minutes from May 16th, 2022. Is there a motion? In a second. Comments or questions? Screen.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley, Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Moving on to approval of treasurer's report. The recommended action is the Board of School Directors approves the May 31st, 2022 treasurer's report and the per the attachment. Is there a motion? And a second. Comments or questions on the treasurer's report? Screen.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley, Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Move to our updates on human resources and HR contracts. First item is personnel. The recommended action is the Board of School Directors approves the following personnel as presented in the attachment. Is there a motion?
Motion.
In a second.
Second.
Any comments or questions on the personnel? Ms. Green.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Next item is Humanis. The recommended action. The Board of School Directors approves the addendum to the contract with Humanis to update service rates effective July 1st, 2022 per the attachment. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second.
Second.
Any comments or questions? Ms. Green.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Etlin,
Aye.
Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Next item is Advanced Protection Company, APC. Recommended action, the Board of School Directors approves the renewed agreement with Advanced Protection Company to provide security and investigatory services for the district as needed at the hourly rate listed in the attached agreement effective July 1st, 2022. Is there a motion? And a second. Second. Any comments or questions?
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Moving under academic affairs, our first item is Lakeside Educational Network. Recommended action is the Board of School Directors approves the agreement with Lakeside Educational Network and the School District of Springfield Township from July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? Okay, Ms. Green.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Our next item is related to a confidential settlement and release agreement. The recommended action, the Board of School Directors approves the confidential settlement and release agreement for student 2022-0621-01. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions?
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Etlin,
Aye.
Mrs. Green,
Aye.
Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Next, visual sound. Recommended action, the Board of School Directors approves the agreement with Visual Sound for the purchase and installation of 45 smart boards in the amount of $285,004. Is there a motion? And a second. Any comments or questions? Just one clarifying question. This was part of the Finance Committee reviewed investments in the smart boards, right? Okay, so that's all budgeted for. Very good. Thank you. We're good. Ms.
Mr. Needleman.
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Edlin. Mrs. Green. Mrs. Hubley.
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes. Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Next is a licensing renewal update for Power School. The Board of School Directors approves the 2022-2023 Power School Special Programs licensing renewal in the amount of $35,000. When you add the cents, it makes it difficult for my brain here. $35,440.08. Is there a motion? In a second.
Second.
Any comments or questions about the 8 cents tacked on this bill? That's great.
Mr. Needleman.
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Edlin. Mrs. Green. Mrs. Hubley.
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes. Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Next, E Plus Group, Inc. The Board of School Directors approves the 3-year lease agreement with E Plus Group, Inc. not to exceed $275,000 for 660 HP Chromebooks pending final solicitor review and approval. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second.
Second.
Any comments or questions? Ms. Green?
Mr. Needleman.
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Edlin. Mrs. Green. Mrs. Hubley.
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes. Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Next item, Riverside Technologies, Inc. Recommended action. The Board of School Directors approves Riverside Technologies, Inc. to provide Chromebook enrollment and green shipping services for 660 HP Chromebook devices in the amount of $55,440. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions?
Can I ask just a quick question, please? I think I know what this is, but a green shipping service? What is that?
So this is part of when we're getting our Chromebooks enrolled and putting all the software on it, putting the cases on it, making sure there's service to it and the shipping of that to our district. So it's getting them all prepped and ready to go so that when they come here, we're able to just disperse them.
Great, thank you. All right, any other comments, questions?
I was just going to ask if it was the 660 and same thing.
Yeah.
Ones we buy them from one place and another place preps them so that we can just ingest and go. Want to make assumptions sometimes.
It's okay. Mr. Needleman.
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Edlin. Mrs. Green. Mrs. Hubley.
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes. Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Now, our next item is the same vendor, Riverside Technologies, Inc. However, this is not part of the last HP branded. So listen closely to the recommended action. The Board of School Directors approves the purchase of 100 HP desktop and laptop devices and peripherals for the high school art lab and district-wide administrative and support staff from Riverside Technologies, Inc., not to exceed the amount of $200,000. Is there a motion? And a second? Second. Any comments or questions?
Is it safe to assume that they're already enrolling them and everything so that? Sorry.
Excellent.
That is correct. Mr. Needleman.
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Edlin. Mrs. Green. Mrs. Hubley.
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes. Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Our next item under this category, item 8, Apple. Recommended action, the Board of School Directors approves the purchase of 45 iMacs for the high school TV studio and creative writing lab from Apple in the amount of $93,510. Is there a motion? In a second. Comments or questions? Ms. Green?
Mr. Needleman.
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco.
Aye.
Dr. Edlin. Mrs. Green. Mrs. Hubley.
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes. Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Number 9, IU 13. Recommended action, the Board of School Directors approves the 2022-2023 Microsoft licensing renewal with IU 13 in the amount of $30,156.05. Is there a motion? A second.
Second.
Any comments or questions?
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Number 10, Montgomery County Intermediary Unit Agreement for Shared Student Services. Recommended action, the Board of School Directors approves the 2022-2023 Intergovernmental Agreement for Shared Student Special Education and Related Services with the MCIU. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second. Comments, questions?
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Next, number 11, Special Education Plan. Recommended action. The Board of School Directors, upon the recommendation of the Academic Affairs Committee, approves the public posting of the required Pennsylvania Department of Education Special Education Plan for a 30-day review period. The plan will be posted for review and comment for 30 days before submitting to PDE for approval. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second? Second. Comments or questions? Just would like to confirm where it will be posted for the public.
It will be under. Sorry, it is actually on the website and it is posted under the Office of Student Services. And the full presentation, which was also provided last night at Academic Affairs, is there.
Excellent, thank you. Ms. Green, we're good.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin,
Aye.
Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Number 12, Savas Learning Elementary Statistics. Recommended action, the Board of School Directors, upon the recommendation of the Academic Affairs Committee, approves the purchase of Savas Learning's elementary statistics for use in our high school math elective, academic statistics, digital and print student and teacher resources for a total cost not to exceed $15,000. Is there a motion? Motion. And a second? Any comments or questions?
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin,
Aye.
Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. All right, we're moving into finance, and this one has a lot of numbers, so bear with me. Our first item is final approval of the 2022-2023 budget. Recommended action. The Board of School Directors approves the budget resolution for the 2022-2023 school year with an expenditure budget in the amount of $64,823,915, requiring a tax rate of 36.3197 mils, representing an increase of 0.9893 mils or 2.8% over the current tax rate. Is there a motion? Motion. And a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions?
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes,
Aye.
Mr. Bedard.
Aye. And thank you again, Ms. Green, for you and your team bringing that budget in under the state allowable index and working with the board so closely. Thank you for that. Item number 2, the 2022-2023 homestead and farmstead exclusion. The Board of School Directors approves the 2022-2023 homestead and farmstead exclusion resolution as required by Special Session Act 1 of 2006 for eligible taxpayers to receive taxpayer relief funds. Is there a motion
Motion.
and a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? Okay, Ms. Green.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley, Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Item number 3 under finance is our real estate tax collection dates. Recommended action, the Board of School Directors approves the following real estate tax collection dates for 2022, 2023. There will be a discount period provided July 1st, 2022 through August 31st, 2022. A face period from September 1st, 2022 to October 31st, 2022. And then a penalty period from November 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2022. Is there a motion? And a second? Any comments or questions? Very good.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley, Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Item 4, 2022, 2023 real estate tax installment payment plan resolution. The Board of School Directors approves the 2022, 2023 real estate tax installment payment plan resolution for the installment payment dates of August 1st, 2022 through September 30th, 2022 and November 30th, 2022. Is there a motion
Motion.
and a second? Any comments or questions? Ms. Green?
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley, Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Item number 5 under finance, 2022-23 breakfast and lunch prices. The Board of School Directors approves the following breakfast and lunch prices for the 2022-23 school year, which reflects no increase from 2019-2020 school year. Elementary breakfast, $1.50, elementary lunch, $2.75, secondary breakfast, $1.50, secondary lunch, $3, adult breakfast, $2.50, and an adult lunch, $3.75. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second? Any comments or questions? Okay, Ms. Green.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, excuse me, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley, Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. All right, moving on to policies. Item 1, the 200 policies. And this is a second reading. So the Board of School Directors approves the second reading of the following 200 policies. And for the interest of time, these are all attached. So I will just say that there's a range of policies from 218 through 246. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions?
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. Our 300 policies, the Board of School Directors approves the second reading of the following 300 policies. Again, this is a range in the attached from policy 326, ranging through policy 351. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second? Any comments or questions?
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley,
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. And finally, under policy number 815.1, recommended action, the Board of School Directors approves the second reading of policy 815.1, website development. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second? Any comments or questions? Great job, Policy Committee.
Mr. Needleman,
Aye.
Mr. DeFranco,
Aye.
Dr. Etlin, Mrs. Green, Mrs. Hubley, Mrs. Hughes, Mr. Bedard.
Aye. All right, we have made it through the bulk of the business and we are going to move to public comments on non-agenda items. Again, no signups in the room, so we'll go online to see if we have any hands. I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Needleman.
Thank you. As Mr. Bedard said, we have no one in attendance. And I'm having technical difficulties at the moment, but I didn't see any hands raised 30 seconds ago when I last had power.
I will confer with Dr. Yannicone.
And I'm looking over, yes, your shoulder. I don't see any hands raised. I don't know if you want to give it another 30 seconds to see if anyone pops on.
We will.
15 seconds, whatever it is, maybe.
Okay, all right. Excellent. Thank you guys for sticking through a lot of content there. And I will say for the record, Dr. Yannicone passed me a note that said we could move to an all in favor and then just, say aye, which would have been a great idea. But I misread your note. And I was thinking, because we've done this in the past where we just vote on everything.
No.
We have the opportunity, but I thought there was a lot here that the public would want to hear in terms of the motions that we're bringing. So I apologize for.
I enjoyed the sunset while we were.
Could in the future actually aggregate everything and
Yes.
do it all in one vote, but still specifically identify and explain the action that you're doing. So you don't need to have separate votes unless a board member requests it.
And I think that is something I'm going to follow up with you on because as I have been discussed with Dr. Yannicone, this is a meeting of the board and I would prefer that. And I think we should maybe
All in
set
favor?
the agenda.
Just to be clear, you could call for all in. As I said, I enjoyed this.
Utilize the longest daylight hours of the
We're
year.
taking, we're having the longest meeting on the longest.
Let's not test that.
Okay, well, let's close things out with a couple of announcements about future meeting dates. We do have some upcoming meetings, the interim board meeting. Oh, believe it or not, we're going to take July off. So congratulations, team. Our next interim board meeting is Tuesday, August 2nd, 2022. And our next regular board meeting will be Tuesday, August 16th, 2022. And all meetings, of course, will be held here in the Fries Memorial Lobby with hybrid option. With that, I'm going to skip any closing statements other than congratulations again for closing out a successful school year and a thanks to the board and the public for sticking it through and for serving the community.
I ask questions.
I'm going to open it up now to any comments or questions.
As I look out this way, I look through these windows at every single meeting
Yes.
and they've changed and it's
They
been a
have.
couple years that, so just curious
Mhm.
where the eyeballs have gone. I hate to say it that way because it was, it sounds like it was this ugly thing.
Until
It
you
was-
just
it was
said that, I didn't
beautiful.
even notice that.
But I
So-
liked it and now it's gone.
Yes, the eyeballs have been retired. They were a long art installation, but the eyes had started to fade a bit.
Okay.
And it looked like the artwork was not quite as vibrant as it had
Gotcha.
once been. And I actually am thrilled today to look at our clean, clear windows at a very nice landscape. But thank you for noticing, Mr. DeFranco. I was wondering who would notice first.
Any other comments or questions from the board?
No, thank you very much to the board for all of your support. Thank you.
All right, with that, we'll adjourn for the school year.